Hello, how are you doing? I hope you had a chance to read some good things over the month of May. If you want to let me know in the comments below the best thing that you read last month, I'd love to hear about it. Or maybe the worst thing. If you had a really disappointing reading experience, then that would be interesting to hear about as well. So I'm going to talk about the 8 books I read over the course of the last month. Most of them were really good, and so yeah, quite a positive reading month. No stinkers. But I found there were some surprising parallels and like themes and ideas running through a number of the different books that I read. And I've talked about this in the past. It can be really surprising when that happens and really delightful. It feels like the books are almost in conversation with each other. And I don't know how much that is just me, putting things into these books because I happen to be reading these very different books all at the same time, or if those themes and connections are actually there, and but I think they really are. And so I'm going to start by talking about the first book that I finished reading at the beginning of this month. I talked about this at the end of my last wrap up, that I was partway through it, and that's A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Ghriofa, who's an Irish writer. She's a poet, and you can really tell that she's a poet in this because the writing is beautiful. It has this wonderful flow to it as she's describing her own experiences as a mother, becoming a mother multiple times, and her connection with this Irish poet from the 1700s who wrote this amazing lament for the death of her husband. And this is a poem that's just been passed down through the generations. At first it was just passed down orally, and then it was finally written down. And she talks about the process of trying to track down different translations of this poem and find out more information about it. And she wants to know more about this woman from the past who wrote it, who we don't actually know all that much about. And so the difficulty of that, and sort of wrestling with this sense of history and feeling this such a strong connection with this history, and how much of that is just her own personal experience reading into it, reading what she wants into this history, and how much of it was actually there, and can you read in the poem, and from these bits and pieces of biographical details she's able to track down, mostly through the family members or descendants of this poet from the past. And yeah, it's such a fascinating process she goes through, and she talks about this from a woman's point of view, how this is especially like feminine perspective on the past and feminine text that she's reading, both in how it was passed down just sort of orally through the generations, and women through the generations have been able to connect with this poem in different way, and talking about the process of motherhood and love and passion for one's partner. And yeah, and it's such a moving examination of our own life, and also our connection with this literary history, and she sort of has to fictionalize some of the past, and because there isn't all that much concrete detail there. And there's this really interesting line from it where she says, "We may imagine that we can imagine the past, but this is an impossibility," and that's such a strong concept, which I think really parallels with this other book I read this month, which is In Memory of Memory by Maria Stepanova, which is translated, just remind me who the translator is, Sasha Dugdale. And this book is shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, which is why I read it. It's the biggest book on the International Booker Prize. And it took me quite a while to get through this book because it's very dense, not just in lengthwise and quite small, solid blocks of text, but also there's just such a density of ideas and information and concepts in this that I really took my time with it, and I was copying down lots and lots of different quotes from it, and contemplating it from different ways, and sort of reflecting on it, and really trying to understand some of the concepts she was getting to. So she started writing this book looking at the history of her family, which she's wanted to write about for a very long time, and she as a starting point for this, her aunt dies, and she goes to her apartment and she's looking through her things, and then she starts going more into the past of her family and physically traveling to some different locations that were significant in her generations past for her family, and looking at different documents and letters. But this book is many different things, but I'd probably classify it as mainly a memoir slash essay, because a lot of bits of it are very like analytical, looking at how we view history and how we view these different documents. What are we reading into them, and what are they actually telling us about the past? How much concrete fact is there, and how much of it is us fictionalizing the past? And it's sort of asking those questions, and in a really fascinating way. I thought it was so interesting and made me really think more complexly about all this issue, about how I view history generally, but also looking at my own past and family history. And, I made a video a couple years ago about going to physically traveling to Latvia, and because I have some Latvian heritage, and sort of connecting with this idea of my ancestors who left there to move to America. And that was such a moving experience, but obviously I don't really know what their lives were like, and that was me sort of reading into it, and it's really interesting to think about these things. But I think we have to, and what she's asking us to do, is take responsibility for not sort of monopolizing the past and the history of people who have gone before us, because really a lot of that is us like putting our own subjective experience into this history and reading what we want out of it. And she approaches this concept from a number of different ways, and I think she doesn't come to any firm conclusions about it. I think it's sort of open-ended, because there's this no way of knowing this like absolute understanding of history that's come before us, but at the same time we don't want to completely disregard it and say like, well, we can't know it. So yeah, it's more picking up these bits and pieces of the past. And I didn't entirely agree with a lot of, or some of the points that she's arguing in this. Like I would really want to like take issue with some of her perspective, especially like on selfies. She goes on this whole rant about how she really doesn't like selfies. She thinks they're these like horrible examples of the past, and or the way we're currently like recording our current times and our own perspective on our experience, and giving this very slanted perspective of it. And also how she talks about pornography, and she just sees it as the lowest form of historical document. And I'm not making any like big case that selfies or pornography are these like amazing like documents, important documents that can tell us a lot, but it almost comes across as slightly curmudgeonly sometimes, like a slight sort of older person's like perspective on a kind of limited way of looking at these documents, and how these documents can tell us other things other than just what we want to read in them, or what we want to take from them, or what they were trying to project, a certain image of something. And yeah, I just think it's a lot more complex than what she some of the points that she makes. But other sections of this I found so incredibly moving and involving, and especially there's this one whole section about an ancestor of hers who went to war, and I think he was the nephew of like her great grandmother maybe, and he went into war, and he was continuously sending letters back inquiring about the health of his family, and there's multiple letters like this, and we don't actually get that much perspective about what his life was like during wartime, or his thoughts or his feelings. It's more just his like concern. And I almost found that like more moving, this like not knowing what his interior life was like, to get this like slight perspective on him. I think he died in battle when he was only 20 years old, and so you get this sense of a life which was cut massively short when he was so young. And yeah, I found that so poignant, how she portrays that and includes these letters of his. But then, yeah, also other sections of it I thought were so well done. And so, yeah, it gave me so much to think about. Honestly, I just thought it was so fascinating. It was there are some parts of it which I think are slightly like a slog to get through. She includes so much detail in this that it could have been trimmed down a bit. It didn't need to be, I think, quite this long. I mean, she includes so much in it, and I'm sure she could have included so much more. This probably could have easily been like 2,000 pages long, and thankfully it's only around 500 pages. But yeah, it could have usefully maybe cut out another couple hundred pages of it, because yeah, it does slightly meander at some points, and there are some parts of it which are slightly repetitive, and but overall, yeah, such a fascinating book, and I'm so glad I read it and took the time with it. I know some other people have like given up on it, and I don't blame them for DNFing it after 50 pages or so, because it's a lot to take on, and if you're in not the right mood, then it's probably not the right book for you. But if you do have the patience and the time and want to think more deeply about these things, this is a great starting point for that, and would highly recommend it. So yeah, another strong book on the International Booker Prize list. And I also read When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut, which is translated again by Adrian Nathan West, and it's translated from the Spanish. And this is one of the favorite contenders, I think, for to win the International Booker Prize, which will be announced tomorrow in an online ceremony. So if you want to watch that, I'll be watching that and really eager to hear what wins. And I've been really anticipating this book. It's the last one I left on the list to get to, and yeah, I thought it was so fascinating. So I mean, both of these books started, the authors, I've been listening to these author interviews that they did at the Edinburgh Book Festival as part of the Booker Prize, and they both said that they started with these books with the intention of writing nonfiction, of Maria Stepanova writing about the history of her family, and Benjamin Labatut writing about a number of different scientists and mathematicians over the 20th century that made these big discoveries and sort of progressive leaps in these ideas that they were working on, from mathematical concepts to ideas about quantum physics, and so yeah, big heavy duty ideas. But he dips into the lives of these different scientists and mathematicians in a way which is so artful and engaging and entertaining, and really fascinating, looking at their lives. He sort of narrates these particular sections of their lives when they're making these discoveries, and the personal toll it takes upon them. And it isn't strictly true what he's writing. It's not strictly biography. He's embellishing and he's fictionalizing these intensely private moments where they're going through these crises, trying to come to these discoveries, and really isolating themselves quite often, or going through a lot of mental strife, trying to get at an idea which they can almost like see off in the distance, but it's obscured, and they're just trying to get to this concept to make this progress forward and make this discovery. And it's so wonderfully entertaining how he writes about that. It's really beautifully written as well. It's like the prose is gorgeous in this, and I think really pulls you along through these different stories, which are there are some like overlapping, I guess you could call them characters between the different sections. They're basically composed of like different essays focusing on different individuals, but then there are some crossovers in the interactions between these intellectuals. And he's asking a much bigger question in exploring these different stories about what is the meaning of human progress, what is the meaning of actually trying to understand the world in a much greater detail, like can we ever completely understand the world and the nature of reality? Like, well, of course we can't. We can get little insights into it, but we can't completely understand it. And I think some of these great thinkers found that there was like a limit to our understanding, or if you did get to a greater understanding of it, that actually the results were quite horrific and made the process of living kind of unbearable. And also there are different consequences to these discoveries, because like all scientific discoveries, they can be used for good or bad things. So some of these discoveries, they went on to allow the production of fertilizer in great quantities and so end famine, and other discoveries went on to create chemical weapons which were used in war to kill a number of people in a really horrific way. And it's even more complex than that, because if you think about how these advances in fertilizer led to a huge boom in the global population over the past century, and it's like an issue of overpopulation in the world, and this is a real issue that we're going to be facing in the coming decades, and so it's quite like questionable whether these discoveries and advancements really are advancements, or is it pushing humanity to a point where life becomes untenable. And so yeah, it's really fascinating and moving how he looks at these different issues through these different lives. And there are some points of it where I think he becomes slightly too fanciful in his fictionalization of them. He depicts a couple of these figures going into these realms of experience, whether it's sexual obsession or drug-induced hallucinations, where it's this like extreme of experience in order to try to get to the answers of these discoveries in ways which feels like it's not that I have any like issue with like moral issue with him writing about these things, but it's more that I could feel the author there sort of steering events and in a way which he wanted to get to this concepts of this muddled reality between genius and madness, rather than feeling like it was organically coming from the I guess the characters or the individuals he was writing about. I mean, he basically makes these historic figures into characters, and there was one section which I thought was so moving, where one of the individuals goes to a desert island and then gets lost in this fog when he goes out on a hike, and that was so moving to read about, and I thought really well done. But yeah, sometimes he takes it a bit, I think, far, or just tries to self-consciously steer the events of these different lives in a way which just didn't, I think, quite work as well as some of the others. But overall, this is such an amazing reading experience and a really different kind of book. I can see why so many people have responded to it so strongly, and like I said, it is so beautifully written. It just sort of flows. It has a much appreciated, like, wonderful brevity to it that Maria Stepanova's book, I think, didn't have, and so that's like definitely a strong point for it. But yeah, such a wonderful, interesting reading experience. I also read Deborah Levy's most recent book, Real Estate, which is what's called the final book in her living autobiography. So yeah, it's the third book in this series. I've only read the second book from it, which is ridiculous. I should have gone back to read the first book before getting to the third book, but I just was really excited to read this. And this is when it explores her experience over 2017, 2018, when she's writing her most recent novel, The Man Who Saw Everything. And and has separated from her husband. She has 2 daughters, and her second daughter is just about to go off to university. She's going to be on her own, and she's finding that she's desiring having a house and real estate of her own, and so it's like how we often look in the windows of real estate agents and kind of imagine ourselves in these houses and these other lives and what that would be like, and so she writes about that experience and how she's imaginatively building up this sense of her ideal real estate. She knows it can never exist in reality, but is just sort of like making her dream house basically of what she would ideally like to have, and it's so playful and imaginative how she adds these different elements to it, and there's this wonderful kind of like grittiness to her writing of writing about experience and showing what life is like for an artist, like someone who has sacrificed the idea of so-called normal career and having a normal career path to create art, to write these books. So I think it's so moving how she shows the consequences of that, and how most writers aren't able to purchase their like ideal home because of this, or have a life which is consistent, which is stable and you can sort of rely upon like other kinds of careers. And it's so enthralling how she writes about that. I enjoyed reading this so much. It's wonderful reading about her reflections on her experiences. So I think I prefer Deborah Levy's autobiographical writing to her fictional writing. I think the novels I've read by her, I think I've read 3 of her novels, and they are really interesting, and but are more sort of conceptual. So like her most recent novel, The Man Who Saw Everything, which has beautiful cover, I did think was really interesting, but yeah, it didn't grip me emotionally like her autobiographical writing does, which is sort of strange. And I almost found it more interesting to read about her process of writing this book within this book, rather than reading the actual novel itself, which is sort of a strange thing to say, but yeah, I sort of find that, and I found that with the second book in her autobiographical trilogy as well, when she was reflecting about writing her novel Hot Milk. In that, I found so interesting. So yeah, these little insights into the writing process and the real life of a writer and how she explores these areas. I mean, she's a kind of like Auntie Mame eccentric sort of aunt that you would ideally like to have, or at least that I would ideally like to have, and wish I could just sort of sit down and listen to her talk about these things. And and so this was a wonderful book to read, and I got so much out of it, and I don't see why this has to be the end of her trilogy. She obviously has many more years to live, or hopefully will be living for many more years and writing more, and so I hope she continues on with it, even though the publicity says that this is the last book in the series. But yeah, hopefully it'll go on. I also read Elizabeth Macneal's new novel, Circus of Wonders, and whenever I looked at this title, I couldn't help thinking of that song from Fiddler on the Roof, Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles. Anyway, you don't want to hear me sing. So this is a novel set in Victorian England, and it's a historical novel. And yeah, and it sort of Maria Stepanova's book made me think about this in a different way as well, because it describes the life of a figure very much like P.T. Barnum, who in this novel he's a character called Jasper Jupiter, who creates a circus, and it follows his ambitions to create a circus that will sort of eclipse P.T. Barnum's spectacular show, and he wants to induce Queen Victoria to come to his show because she had this special interest in kind of freak shows, and so yeah, he collects these different performers from around the country to create this show, including this girl named Nell, who lives in a small village, and she has these birthmarks, these speckled birthmarks across her face and her body, which have kind of made her this curious figure in her village and kind of alienated her from other people. And her father literally sells her to Jasper to work in this circus. And what I think is so interesting about this novel is that it gives a different perspective on this romantic idea we have of circuses from that time. Like, there was the movie a few years ago called The Greatest Showman, which fictionalized the life of P.T. Barnum to show him as this man of bringing these different individuals, these misfit individuals from different areas together, and they could form their own sense of community together, this sort of misfit community. And Elizabeth Macneal shows that in her novel as well. But in reality, P.T. Barnum didn't care about the welfare, or care so much about the welfare of these individuals, that he literally purchased to perform in his circus, just like Jasper does in this novel. And Elizabeth deals with some of those real world consequences more. Jen Campbell made a whole video talking about The Greatest Showman, her issue with this fictionalization of P.T. Barnum and a kind of romanticization of his life. And so she deals with the real world issues of this more, and the harsher reality, and the toll that takes upon the performers, who are kind of trapped in this life, whether they want it or not. And it is a liberating experience in some ways, but in other ways it's kind of degrading, because they're being put on show and made into a spectacle. And so she deals with that, and Nell's experience living in this circus, and also the experience of Jasper's brother Toby, who's sort of the misfit of the family, and the less favored brother, and about Toby's relationship with Nell. And it follows that experience and the dramatic events as the circus becomes much more popular, because Nell becomes a star within the circus. And it's a really enjoyable, moving novel, and I think Elizabeth Macneal is so good at creating this historical detail in a way which is really brings it to life. And so this was a really enjoyable reading experience. I don't know if it's like the most memorable novel I've ever read, but definitely an enjoyable novel to read if you want that sort of experience. I also read the biography Black Spartacus by Sudhir Hazareesingh, all about the life of Toussaint Louverture, who was a leader of the Haitian Revolution in the late 1700s, around 1790, when the Haitian Revolution occurred. And he was born a black slave on the nation of Haiti, and through his intelligence and his cunning and his skills, he was able to work up and become a leader of this Haitian Revolution, and become a general and a leader of the new country, and trying to make deals with the former colonial powers that have stakes in different Caribbean countries. And he's such a fascinating individual. But again, because I was reading this almost simultaneously with Stepanova's book, it made me think about this history in a different way, because this is a very straightforward biography, in that the author researched all of the facts that he could, and documents that he could, to piece together an understanding of Louverture's life, and he does that really well, and really thoroughly, and takes care to take issue with some past biographies of Louverture's life, and past perspectives on him, to give this new understanding of his life, and as complete an understanding as is possible. And there really is a limited amount of detail and documents about Louverture's life. So this is a really challenging, difficult thing to do. And also Louverture obscured some of the things about his own past. He was like fictionalizing his own past in his lifetime as a like political necessity to try to put some of his enemies like off the track of trying to track down things about him, and but also to create his own mythology within his own lifetime. And he has become this figure of revolution and fighting against oppression, and a libertarian who wants people to live together in harmony, and people to take their own responsibility for their own lives and to create a progressive, like, working society. And so yeah, I think it's such a fascinating figure in that way. But I found myself slightly, because I am someone that prefers reading novels, like, it did get so bogged down in some of the detail and the military detail of the time, that I found some parts of this like a bit of a slog to get through, because I wanted to know more about his interior life and what he was thinking and feeling. And of course we can't know that, and to try to speculate on any of that is a kind of projection, and I understand that. But he lists at the end some novels that have been written about his life, and I found myself almost wanting to read those novels more than this strict biography, which I think is so. I hadn't heard of Louverture before reading this book, and I'm so glad that I did, because yeah, he, like I said, he is such a fascinating figure from the past. But yeah, I personally would rather read a novel about him. But I think it is such a strong book, and like I said, when I got this in the book post, I read this because it's been shortlisted for this year's Wolfson History Prize, which is a great award for nonfiction, and I've read so many books in the past, nonfiction books in the past, that have been nominated for this award, and this is another one, again, that has such a beautiful cover to it. And so yeah, it's such a fascinating, if you want to know more about Caribbean history, if you want to know about figures who fought against black slavery and in the past, and there's such a fascinating book to read, and I'm really glad I read it, but yeah, I'm still longing for a more imaginative look at this history and Louverture's experience. And coincidentally, another book I read that was set in the Caribbean is This One Sky Day by Leone Ross. And in America, this novel was called Papa Show, I believe. And I asked the publisher about why that was so, and I think the American publisher just thought that title would work better for an American audience, and wanted to describe the physical place of this rather than this kind of concept of this one sky day, which is a quote in the novel. And so yeah, Papa Show is this fictional archipelago in the Caribbean that the author has created, and it's really a magical land, because each individual on this island has a different fantastical ability that they're just born with, and gives them really special abilities. And so like the main character of this is a chef, and he has this ability to be able to season food and dough just using his hands. It just comes out of his hands, and he's able to work it into the dough that he's making. And that would be such, as someone who loves baking, that would be such an amazing ability to have, because I hate rooting through the spice shelves to get to try to find this particular spice for this recipe, and if I could just do that in my hands, that would be amazing. And so yeah, it's a story set over the course of a day when a wedding is taking place. So the main thrust of this narrative is about a wedding that's taking place, and how this chef is hired to cater to this wedding, although he doesn't really want to. And he holds a very special position on the island of being a figure that creates a meal for everyone on the island, one particular meal that they need at a particular time. And so it's like fulfilling something they need in their life that they don't quite realize that they need. It's like fulfilling a hunger in their life. And yeah, it's mainly about him, but it's also about a whole cast of characters that have all these different abilities. And so it's capturing just like the culture and feel of this island. And it's so imaginative and exciting and absurd how she tells this story. I just found it completely riveting. It's like one of the best novels I've read for a while. I just thought it's so imaginative, and just like it just makes you see the world like in this vivid way, that you can kind of like it just, reality can become a bit gray after a while, and I just feel like it like gave color to the world again. And so I just enjoyed reading this so much. I mean, it's quite a long novel, but I felt like it really warranted it to create the experience of this community in this way. And this edition I have has wonderful like sprayed edge pages to it, and it's just such a wonderful book. I think the American cover for this is beautiful as well, and I just hope more people read this book, because it is such a wonderful journey to go on, and just like completely wrapped me up in the experience of these characters and this story. And there's one point in the novel where this extreme event occurs across the island to all of the female inhabitants of the island, and something affects them in a very intimate and particular way, which is so bombastic and wild. I almost couldn't believe what I was reading, but I was completely gripped by it, and I love how the author really intelligently shows the consequences of what would happen if such an event like this occurred, and I just loved that. I thought it was so wonderful and imaginative, and I can't have lots of superlatives for this novel. And finally, I also read the novel Boys Don't Cry by Fiona Scarlett, which follows the story of two brothers in Ireland who live on a council estate in Dublin, and it follows their different stories, literally going back and forth between their perspectives, sort of in alternating chapters. And these alternating chapters are taking place on different timelines. So you get these different perspectives of these brothers' lives at a particular point in their family history. And it's so moving how it does that, alternating between them. So you get bits and pieces of their story, and you realize at one point something that has happened to one of the brothers in the past, and how the other family members are dealing with this, and it is so emotional. I got really tearful reading some sections of this book. And their father, he is involved in a drug gang, and he's been imprisoned for being involved in that. And the older brother is trying to get out from this perspective of what he should become, that he should follow in his father's footsteps. And the younger brother is struggling with a serious illness and battling with cancer, and it shows their stories. And I grew to really feel close to both of these brothers, though I felt like the narrative about the younger brother's life was slightly more effective, and I got a bit confused at one point later in the book about the older brother's story and what actually happened in the story. I just felt a bit confused about, like, well, what actually happened in that scene, and maybe it was intentionally left a bit obscure, or maybe I just didn't get what was actually happening, or what the consequences of it were. But I was a bit confused by that. But overall, I thought this was a really moving and beautifully told novel. It's a debut novel, so a really strong start for this author, and I hope she writes more books, and because I'd like to read more of her writing. And so a great contemporary Irish novel. So those are all of the books I read. Like I said, let me know if you've read any of these books. If you have any thoughts about them, I'd love to know about what you think in the comments below. But also let me know about what you've been reading over the past month, and some of the best or worst things you've read, and I'd love to hear about it. But I hope you're reading good things, and maybe see you tomorrow at the International Booker Prize. I'll be watching it online and following that. So it'll be exciting to see who wins that. But I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.